The cruel gift. The note was pinned to my pillow when I jolted awake on my son's wedding day. I reached up. Smooth skin. My scalp burned. The sharp smell of antiseptic still lingering. I didn't scream. I opened the safe, pulled out the envelope containing the paperwork to transfer $18.5 million, and changed the game. Right then. I knew this wasn't just Daniel's wedding day. This was the day I reclaimed my life. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. I stumbled to the bathroom. Marble tiles cold beneath my bare feet. The woman staring back from the mirror wasn't Margaret Harrison, the commercial property developer who transformed Seattle's waterfront district. She was someone humiliated to the core. The thick silver hair I had cared for meticulously, my pride for decades, was gone. All that remained was a slick, burning red scalp, raw and exposed. Tears surged, hot and bitter, but I forced them back down. They wanted me to fall apart. They wanted me to disappear on the day I should have stood tall as the groom's mother. No, I wasn't giving Victoria that victory. On the oak nightstand, I saw an ivory envelope with neat blue ink, so carefully written it looked rehearsed. Have a great day at my wedding. A crude heart drawn at the end. The paper still carried an expensive perfume, the same scent I had smelled 100 times on my future daughter-in-law. I didn't need to guess who did it. The bedroom door creaked open. Elena, my housekeeper of 15 years, stepped in with a tray of coffee. When she saw me, the tray nearly slipped from her hands. Her face went pale. Miss Margaret? Oh my God, what happened? I turned, meeting her eyes. My voice came out steadier than I felt. Elena, did you see anyone enter my room last night? She set the tray down, hands trembling. I saw Miss Victoria. She came upstairs around midnight. I thought she was just checking on you before the big day. I didn't think. I'm so sorry. I held up a hand. It's not your fault. You couldn't have known. But the confirmation settled like ice in my chest. Victoria had done this. Deliberately. Cruelly. On the morning of her own wedding, she wanted to strip me of dignity, to make sure I knew my place. I took a long breath, trembling but clearer than ever. The bedroom safe was still open from last night, where I had carefully placed the envelope holding the paperwork to transfer $18.5 million to Daniel and Victoria. That was the wedding gift I had spent weeks preparing, believing it would be the final bridge to keep my son close, to show Victoria I wasn't an obstacle, but an ally. Now, when my fingers touched that envelope, it felt different. The paper wasn't smooth anymore. It was sharp, like a blade cutting into my palm. I gripped it, then set it back in the safe, turned the dial, and listened to the dry metal click. The decision was made. That gift was never leaving this safe. I walked to the phone on my nightstand and dialed Thomas Bennett, our longtime family attorney. He picked up after 2 rings, his voice warm and familiar. Margaret, good morning. Ready to sign off on the transfer? I have prepped everything you asked. I kept my voice steady, controlled. Thomas, put it on hold and not a single dollar moves. And tonight, after the reception, I want you at my house. We are rewriting the entire will. Silence on the other end for a moment. Then, cautious. Is something wrong? I closed my eyes. Just one thing. I said, I finally woke up. I set the phone down and walked to the closet. I was still shaking, but a small flame had caught in my chest. Victoria might have shaved my head, but she couldn't strip away the pride and will I had honed for decades. I pulled a charcoal gray cashmere dress off the hanger, the one I bought myself after closing a 30-story waterfront development deal in downtown Seattle. I smoothed the cool fabric between my fingers and remembered that feeling of victory. I knew I would need it today, not just as a dress, but as armor. The landline rang, cutting through the silence. I jumped, heart pounding. Not Daniel, not Victoria. It was Rosa Martinez, my hairstylist of over 20 years. My throat tightened, but I kept my voice even. Rosa, I need you right now. Bring the best wig you have. No one can know. She didn't pry. She only whispered, I'll be there in 20 minutes. While I waited, I sat in the armchair by the window and looked out at the yard. Seattle's signature drizzle fell steadily, coating every branch, every red brick path I had walked thousands of times. The rain blurred the glass, turning the world outside into watercolor strokes of gray and green. It matched the storm churning inside me. Memories crashed in, unbidden and relentless. The day I became a widow at 32, the night I buried my husband with 12-year-old Daniel asleep in my arms, his face still streaked with tears, and I swore he would never know fear or hunger. I kept that vow for 3 decades. I worked without stopping. I remember the day it all changed. They handed me Bob's death certificate at the hospital. Sudden heart attack on the highway. I was stunned. 1 minute we were talking about expanding our little real estate office. The next, I was frozen in a hospital corridor, palms pressed over my face, hearing my 12-year-old son ask, Mom, where's Dad? I had no answer. I pulled Daniel in, held him tight against my chest, and silently swore he would never lack for anything. We went back to our small house outside Seattle that night. I sat in an old armchair for hours, watching Daniel asleep on the sofa, his young face still damp with tears. In the dark, I understood. From now on, the weight was mine. No Bob to split bills, no shoulder to lean on. Just me and a boy who didn't yet know how to knot a tie for his school uniform. The next morning, as the sun lifted over the horizon and rain tapped against the windows, I put on a thin sweater, tied my hair back, and started my new job. Widowed mother turned accidental businesswoman. I had no capital, no specialized knowledge, but I had one thing. I knew I had to survive. I learned to read financial statements like a foreign language, spent hours at the public library studying real estate, land use, property management. At first, the numbers spun in my head, but page by page, I understood that knowledge would be the sharp knife protecting us from poverty. Those first years were brutal. I worked from 5 in the morning until late at night. Days spent knocking on doors of tired old houses, pitching low-cost brokerage work, nights bent over notes, learning market analysis, price comparisons, cold calling leads. Some nights I cried after another rejection, then got up at dawn to make Daniel breakfast and drive him to school. I went hungry many days to save money for his new math books. When he asked, Mom, why aren't you eating with me? I smiled and lied. I already ate. You go ahead. He believed me, and I doubled down. I wanted him to grow up feeling secure, not like I did as a child, digging through empty cupboards for the last stale roll. 3 years later, I bought my first duplex on the south side of Seattle. I remember signing the papers, my hand shaking so badly I could barely hold the pen. When I put the pen down, a new door opened. From there, it was brick by brick, unit by unit, building by building. The Harrison real estate footprint started with freezing morning walks to a broker's office, hoarse throat calls, and nights lit by a desk lamp over burning eyes. The doorbell rang, pulling me back to the present. I let Rosa in. She carried a long black box, her face tight with concern. When she saw my head, she covered her mouth. Oh my God. Margaret. I cut off her pity with a tight smile. Don't ask. Just help me stand tall in front of people today. It took nearly an hour to fit a soft gray silver wig that looked and moved like real hair. When Rosa held up the mirror, I shivered. The woman in the glass was no longer the wreck from the morning. She had the cool poise and razor gaze my business counterparts used to respect. I recognized her. Margaret Harrison, the woman who never accepted defeat. I thanked Rosa, slipped a thick envelope into her hand, and walked her out. Alone again. I opened my purse and carefully tucked in a small voice recorder. My instincts told me that today, words without proof would save no one. The clock read 10 in the morning. 3 hours until the ceremony at St. James Cathedral, one of Seattle's oldest churches. I closed my eyes and drew a deep breath. The battle started this morning, the second my hand touched that bare scalp. But the ending, that would be mine to decide. As I sat there, more memories flooded back. Not just the early struggles, but the slow realization of what I had created and what I had failed to teach. Daniel was different from me. He saw results, not the process. At 18, he was used to a new car, tuition paid in full, never thinking about the price of a shirt or a textbook. I had raised him like a prince and forgot to teach the prince how to wield a sword on his college graduation day. I watched him stride across the stage at the University of Washington, his robe billowing in the breeze. I thought I had done it, turned a fatherless boy into a successful man. But deep in his eyes, I saw something that made my stomach tighten. Not gratitude, entitlement. At 25, he came to me, calm as could be. Mom, I want my own condo downtown. You'll cover the down payment, right? It wasn't a question. It was an assumption. I nodded, wrote the check, asked no questions, not the first ask, and certainly not the last. At 30, he brought Victoria home and said flatly, "We want to do Europe, nice and luxurious. You'll take care of it, right?" Not a request. An order wrapped in a smile. I had spoiled my son. I thought I was making up for him losing his father too soon. In truth, I was teaching him to treat a mother's love like an endless bank account. I realized it too late. Then Victoria arrived and made everything worse, from day one. I felt the chill in her eyes. She was a smooth talker, good at charming a room with travel stories, fashion insights, career plans. But when she looked at me, it was pure scrutiny. No interest in the woman who had raised Daniel, who had built the fortune he now enjoyed. I let it slide, telling myself time would soften things. Instead, I was pushed further and further to the margins. I remember one particular dinner at my house on Mercer Island. Victoria sat across from me, her perfectly manicured nails tapping the wine glass. She tilted her head and said with a sweet smile, "Mrs. Harrison, don't you think that color ages you? Maybe try something fresher, more modern." The table went quiet. Daniel just laughed, nodding along like a shadow. I sat there with my salad, forcing a smile to keep the table from turning into a battlefield. Each time, another scar etched into my heart. But there was more I hadn't told anyone. When Daniel was 16, I was diagnosed with early-stage breast cancer. I hid it from him because I didn't want him to worry during his crucial high school years. I drove myself to chemotherapy sessions in the early morning, came home to cook his favorite lasagna for lunch, then went to work in the afternoon. Daniel never knew. Not until years later when he stumbled upon my medical records while looking for property documents, and even then, he never asked about it, never said thank you, never acknowledged what I had endured alone. I kept handing over money and kept my mouth shut because I was afraid of one thing, losing my son. I believed that if I was more generous, if I gave them more, maybe Daniel would remember a mother's love. That's why I prepared the massive wedding gift, $18.5 million. To me, it was the last key. The hope of keeping me connected to Daniel and helping Victoria see I wasn't an obstacle, but an ally. But this morning shattered that illusion. The shaved hair, the mocking note. Everything hit like a slap that woke me up. Suddenly, I could see clearly. For years, I had traded my health, my youth, and my self-respect to hold on to a bond that was already rotten. I remembered the first time Daniel brought Victoria home. It was a rainy Sunday afternoon, much like today. She stepped into my living room wearing a cream-colored coat and designer heels, her smile bright and practiced. Daniel introduced her with pride in his voice. "Mom, this is Victoria Chen. We've been seeing each other for 6 months." 6 months, and I was only hearing about her now. That should have been my first warning. Victoria extended her hand, her grip firm and cold. "Mrs. Harrison, I've heard so much about you. Daniel says you're a legend in Seattle real estate." Her words were polite, but her eyes measured me like I was a property she was considering purchasing. Over the following months, Victoria played her role perfectly. She called me Mom within the first few weeks. She came to my house when Daniel was traveling for work, sitting in my kitchen with tears streaming down her face. She told me about her struggling family, her father's failed business, her mother's medical bills. My heart broke for her. I wrote her a check for $50,000 to help your family. I said, "You're going to be part of ours." She hugged me, sobbing into my shoulder, thanking me over and over. 2 weeks later, I saw photos on her private Instagram account, Victoria and her friends in Paris, London, Rome, designer shopping bags, 5-star hotels, a month-long European vacation funded by my money, my trust, my foolish belief that she cared. I never confronted her. I told myself maybe she needed the escape. Maybe the family situation wasn't as dire as she claimed. I made excuses because I wanted Daniel to be happy. I wanted to believe his choice was genuine. But the small cruelties continued. At family dinners, she would toss light jabs wrapped in concern. "Mrs. Harrison, have you thought about retirement? You've worked so hard. Don't you think it's time to let the younger generation take over? Or, Daniel and I were looking at your company's structure. So many outdated systems. We have ideas for modernization." She never said it outright, but the message was clear. "Step aside, old woman. Your time is done." Daniel never defended me. He would nod along, sometimes adding his own suggestions. "Mom, Victoria has a point. You've been doing this for 30 years. Maybe it's time to enjoy life. Let me handle the business side." Each word felt like a small betrayal, but I swallowed them. I told myself he was just trying to help, trying to prove himself. What they didn't know, what I never told them, was how much I had already sacrificed. The cancer I fought alone. The chemotherapy sessions where I sat in a cold hospital room, poison dripping into my veins, thinking only of getting home in time to make Daniel dinner. The nights I vomited until I had nothing left, then brushed my teeth, put on lipstick, and showed up to business meetings the next morning. I wore my late husband's watch every single day for 33 years. Bob gave it to me on our 10th anniversary. It was a simple silver watch, nothing extravagant, but every tick reminded me why I worked so hard. For Daniel, for the family we were supposed to be. Today, as I touched the watch on my wrist, I realized I had been living on borrowed time, borrowed dreams. It was time I reclaimed my own. I stood up from the armchair and walked to my dresser. I opened the top drawer and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside were birthday cards Daniel had made for me when he was little, crayon drawings of the two of us holding hands. One card read, "You're my hero, Mom. When I grow up, I'll take care of you." I traced the words with my finger, feeling the weight of broken promises. That little boy was gone. In his place stood a man who saw me as an ATM, who allowed his fiancée to humiliate me, who planned to take my money and run to another woman. The contrast was so sharp it cut deeper than any blade. I closed the wooden box and placed it back in the drawer. The past was the past. Today was about the future, about reclaiming what was mine. I grabbed a gray wool coat and the cashmere scarf Daniel had given me 10 years ago for Christmas. That memory now felt like a dull knife scratching, not bleeding. I told myself, "Son, today I'll show you just how badly you misjudged your mother." When I stepped outside, Seattle's cold wind slapped my face, but I didn't flinch. The drizzle had turned into a steady rain, typical for October. I pulled the collar up, adjusted the wig carefully, and got into the car. My driver, Marcus, glanced at me in the rearview mirror, ready to speak. I shook my head gently. I needed silence. I needed to feed the fire that had just been lit inside me. On the way to the cathedral, I watched people through the rain-streaked window, couples holding hands under shared umbrellas, families guiding small children across the street, laughing as they dodged puddles. I wondered how many of them had been betrayed by the very people they trusted most. How many had been forced to choose between love and self-respect. How many mothers sat in silence, swallowing indignities because they feared losing their children. I knew today I wasn't fighting only for myself, but for the countless mothers used by their own children, with motherhood thrown back at them as a demand rather than a bond. The thought steadied me, gave me purpose beyond personal hurt. The car stopped at the cathedral gates. I pressed a hand to my chest and felt a strange calm, not trembling, but strength rising. The strength of truth, of a woman pushed to the edge who refused to break. I opened the door, stepped out into the rain, and smiled. That smile wasn't for the crowd waiting inside, or for Daniel, or for Victoria. It was for me, Margaret Harrison, who woke up on the most important morning of her life with a shaved head and a heart more awake than ever. St. James Cathedral rose before me, its Gothic spires piercing the gray sky. The stone facade was dark with rain, and warm light glowed from the stained glass windows. I had been here many times over the years for weddings, funerals, charity events, but today felt different. Today, these sacred walls would witness something raw and true. I walked through the heavy wooden doors. Inside, the air smelled of candle wax, old wood, and fresh flowers. White roses and lilies lined the aisle, their petals perfect and pristine. Guests were already gathering, their voices a low murmur that echoed under the vaulted ceiling. I recognized many faces, business associates, family friends, people who had known Daniel since he was a child. They smiled at me, nodding respectfully. "Mrs. Harrison, you look lovely. Such a beautiful day for a wedding." I returned their smiles, playing the role expected of me, but inside, I was calculating. Every step, every word, every moment from here on out had to be precise. I made my way to the front pew on the groom's side and sat down. The wooden bench was cold and hard beneath me. I placed my small clutch purse on my lap, feeling the weight of the voice recorder inside. That tiny device held the power to shatter illusions, to strip away masks, to reveal the rot beneath the beauty. I looked up at the stained glass windows. Light filtered through, casting colors across the stone floor, reds, blues, golds, greens. It reminded me that even in darkness, there could be illumination. Perhaps that's what I was meant to do today. Bring light to the lies, no matter how painful. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes for a moment, and whispered a silent prayer. Not for forgiveness, not for mercy, but for courage. The courage to do what needed to be done. I sat on the cold pew, looking up at the stained glass flickering with light, and memories rolled in. While the staff rushed flowers and candles into place, my mind slipped back to where it all began. Love, loss, and the grit to build a life from nothing. I remembered the day it all changed at 32. They handed me Bob's death certificate, sudden heart attack on the highway. I was stunned. 1 minute we were talking about expanding our little office. The next, I was frozen in a hospital corridor, hearing my 12-year-old son ask, "Mom, where's Dad?" I had no answer. I pulled Daniel in, held him, and silently swore he would never lack for anything. But today, sitting in this cathedral, I understood something I hadn't seen before. In protecting Daniel from pain, I had protected him from growth. In giving him everything, I had taught him nothing about earning, about gratitude, about the weight of sacrifice. I stood and stepped into the side hall, needing air, needing space to think. My heels clicked softly on the stone floor, blending with the whispers of bridesmaids ahead. The corridor was narrow, lined with tall stone columns carved with classical patterns. I meant to step outside, but then I froze. In the quiet, a familiar voice came, low and urgent. It was Daniel. I pressed against a large stone column, forcing my breathing to slow. My son's voice carried in a hushed echo, each word slicing the space like a knife. "Jessica, no, don't show up here now. I told you. Just wait until after the ceremony." That name stabbed my chest. Jessica Monroe. I had seen her many times at Daniel's tech startup office, the young marketing coordinator with quick eyes and a bright smile. I used to think she was just a dedicated employee. Now, everything was clear as day. Daniel went on, his voice dropping to a whisper into the phone. "After I get that money from my mother, everything will change. We won't have to hide anymore. Won't have to sneak around. Just be patient a little longer." I let my hand grip the stone column, steadying myself. Each word hit my ears like a cold blade. That money he meant was the wedding gift I had planned, $18.5 million. The work of my lifetime suddenly turned into a ticket for my son to run off with his mistress while he was still about to marry Victoria. I tilted my head, heart pounding so hard I thought he might hear it. Daniel's voice came again, heavier this time. "You know how my mother is. She always wants to please me, always afraid I'll go without. As soon as she signs this afternoon, we'll have it all. A fresh start. Freedom. No strings." I bit my lip to keep from making a sound. My son, the boy who once cried into a pillow for his mother, now saw me as a wallet. He wasn't just betraying me, he was betraying his own wedding, turning those vows into a joke, a performance for money. In that moment, I heard footsteps rush through the hall. Daniel lowered his voice one last time. "I have to go. Keep it quiet. After the honeymoon, I'll take care of everything. Jessica, trust me." Then the call cut off, leaving a thick silence. I slipped back into the shadows, pretending to study a flower arrangement in the corner. A few staff members hurried by, paying me no mind. Daniel stepped out from behind the column, straightened his jacket, and a flicker of strain crossed his face before he smiled. The smile everyone expects from a happy groom. But I had seen, and I had heard. I returned to the pew and sat like a composed churchgoer. In my purse, the tiny recorder glowed red, quietly storing every lie Daniel had said. My chest ached, but something inside had hardened. I no longer clung to the fantasy that money would mend a mother-son bond. I stayed on the pew, working my breath back into rhythm after what I just overheard. A cold metallic ringing kept sounding inside me, a warning that the truth wasn't done revealing itself. I knew Daniel had another woman, knew he was only waiting for the money to leave Victoria. But in my bones, I felt Victoria wasn't innocent either. She had never bothered to hide that condescending look she saved just for me. I wanted to know what she truly thought. Wanted to see my future daughter-in-law's real face, not the glossy one she wore for the world. I rose and slipped down the corridor toward the bridal prep room. The polished marble floor reflected my steps, each one deliberate and quiet. At the far end, the door sat half open, white light spilling out along with bouncy music and the sharp laughter of several women. I stopped just outside, heart racing, but my feet refused to move away. Through the crack, Victoria's voice rang out, clear as day, high, confident, brimming with triumph. You know what? In just a few hours, I'll have the entire fortune in my hands, $18.5 million. And by law, I get half. Daniel's so naive. He has no idea. Laughter broke out from the bridesmaids. I went rigid. My fingers dug into the doorframe, my palms ice cold. Victoria kept going, her voice lower now but edged with malice. And after that, I'm filing for divorce. I've already contacted an attorney. I don't need to stay with Daniel forever. With that money, I can start fresh, freer, and more comfortable. A bridesmaid giggled. What about the mother-in-law? She's a handful. Acts like the house is hers. Victoria dropped her voice. Cold as ice. Don't worry. Once the money's in, I'll push Daniel to put her in a high-end nursing home. Park her there. Let someone else handle her. Once she's out of the house and the company, she won't have a say in anything. The room burst into shrill laughter, crisp as blades slicing my skin. I shook all over, but not from fear. It was anger rising from the marrow, a firestorm burning away the weakness of my morning. I stood there frozen until I realized I was crushing the recorder in my purse. The red light kept blinking, faithfully catching every word, every bitter laugh. I closed my eyes for a second and knew I had just gripped a double-edged knife. One edge to protect, the other to strike back. I eased away without a sound. My heart hammered like it would explode, but my steps held steady. I knew if I stayed 1 minute longer, I would charge in and scream in Victoria's face. I didn't. Life had taught me enough. Big battles aren't won by hot anger, but by patience and planning. Back in the main sanctuary, no one noticed I had been gone. Guests were gathering, their chatter filling the air. I smiled and greeted them, burying the storm twisting inside me. In the colored glass, I caught my reflection, a silver-haired woman in a charcoal gray dress, red lipstick perfectly applied. No one knew that, only a few steps away. I had just heard my future daughter-in-law call me an old woman who needs to be locked away. I sat, hands loosely folded, inside my purse. The recording had become a living piece of proof. I pictured it playing for the crowd, Sabrina's smug laughter echoing, her face going pale as she realized everything was out. The thought gave me an odd, cooling calm. Victoria wanted me erased, tucked away in some distant nursing home. Daniel wanted to drain the money and run with his lover. Both thought I was weak, old, easily beaten. But that contempt gave me strength. I would turn their trap into my launch pad. In that instant, I knew the morning's humiliation had become a pivot point. The church bells pealed, each round rolling through the space like a familiar refrain. Guests took their seats. White draped pews were dotted with deep red roses and soft candlelight. I sat in the front row on the groom's side, fingers lightly holding the small clutch on my lap. All eyes turned to the back where Victoria was about to enter on her father's arm. The big doors opened. She appeared in a white French lace gown, the train nearly touching the steps. Murmurs and gasps spread through the crowd. Camera flashes popped like tiny bursts of lightning. Victoria beamed, gliding forward like the heroine in a fairy tale, her veil trailing behind her like a cloud. I watched her and couldn't help recalling the cruel words from the dressing room minutes ago. Behind that shimmer was a calculating heart, and I was the only one here who knew it. Daniel waited at the end of the aisle, sharp in a black tuxedo with a crisp white tie. His smile beamed wide and proud, but to me it was only a mask. I heard his whisper on the phone in my head. After I get that money from my mother, everything will change. The image of the boy who once gripped my hand, shaky on toddler legs, was gone. In front of me stood a man who had sold off both conscience and kinship. Victoria's father, David Chen, walked her down the aisle with a stiff posture. His face was unreadable, but I could see the tension in his jaw. He had built his own business from nothing, much like I had. I wondered if he knew what kind of woman his daughter had become, or if he was as blind as I had been with Daniel. The ceremony began. Father Patrick O'Brien, the elderly priest who had served St. James Cathedral for over 40 years, stood at the altar. His opening words were steady and solemn, echoing under the high vault. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Daniel and Victoria in holy matrimony. Marriage is a sacred bond, built on trust, honesty, and unwavering commitment. I tried to focus, but every word felt like a taunt. Marriage is a sacred union. Trust, honesty, commitment. The irony was so thick I could taste it. I glanced around. Teary eyes, tender smiles, people sure they were witnessing true love. Only I knew they were watching a carefully staged production, a performance designed to extract money and power. Father Patrick continued, "Marriage is not to be entered into lightly, but reverently, deliberately, and in accordance with the purposes for which it was instituted by God. Into this holy union, Daniel and Victoria now come to be joined." I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing bitterly. Holy union. There was nothing holy about what I had overheard today. Nothing sacred about a groom planning to abandon his bride for a mistress, or a bride plotting to divorce and institutionalize her mother-in-law. The organ music swelled, filling the cathedral with rich, haunting notes. The choir began to sing, their voices blending in perfect harmony. It was beautiful, achingly so, and it made the deception even more grotesque. All this beauty, all this reverence, wrapped around a core of lies. Victoria reached the altar. David Chen placed her hand in Daniel's, then stepped back. For a brief moment, his eyes met mine. There was something in his gaze, a flicker of doubt, maybe even apology. But he said nothing. He took his seat beside his wife, who dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, tears of joy streaming down her face. If only she knew. Father Patrick smiled at the couple. "Daniel and Victoria, you have come here today to seek the blessing of God and this community upon your marriage. I charge you both, as you stand in His presence, to remember that love and loyalty alone will sustain your union." When it came time for the vows, Daniel turned to Victoria, his voice low and steady, projecting just enough to reach the back pews. "I promise to love you, respect you, share every joy and sorrow with you, and be by your side for life." I bit my lip and listened. Every word carved into the morning's memory like a blade. He promised fidelity, yet just hours earlier, he had been whispering to another woman. He promised a future together while planning in his head to leave his wife once he got the money. The hypocrisy was staggering, and yet his face showed nothing but sincerity. He had learned to lie well. Then it was Victoria's turn. She lifted her face, eyes shining as if full of genuine love. Her voice was soft, almost trembling with emotion. "I promise to stand by you, care for you, face every challenge together, and keep this love forever." I almost laughed. Her vows were pretty as a poem, carefully rehearsed and delivered with perfect timing. But in my head, I still heard the chill of her words from the bridal room. "I'll file for divorce." After that, the mother-in-law goes to a nursing home. That scheming tone and her glowing face were so opposite it made my skin crawl. Father Patrick nodded approvingly. He raised his hands in blessing. "These vows you have spoken are sacred promises before God and these witnesses. Let no one take them lightly." The irony was almost too much to bear. I glanced around the cathedral. People were smiling, some wiping away tears. They believed every word. They saw a young couple in love, starting a life together. They didn't see the rot beneath the surface, the greed and betrayal that poisoned everything. Father Patrick's voice rang out. "If any person here knows of any reason why these two should not be joined in marriage, speak now or forever. Hold your peace." Silence fell over the cathedral. For a second, I wanted to stand and shout that the whole ceremony was a lie. I wanted to tell everyone what I had heard, to expose them right here, right now. My hand tightened on the clutch in my lap. The recorder inside felt heavy, alive with the weight of truth, but I clenched my hands and held back. Not yet. The trap I had set needed time, and that big audience was exactly the witness I wanted when the truth came out. Timing was everything. If I spoke now, they could deny, deflect, claim I was a bitter old woman trying to ruin her son's happiness. But later, at the reception, with champagne flowing and guards down, the evidence would speak for itself. Father Patrick waited a moment longer, then smiled, hearing no objections. "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Daniel, you may kiss your bride." Finally, the bells rang bright, and the priest declared them husband and wife. Daniel leaned down to kiss Victoria, and the church burst into applause. I clapped too, slow, firm, smiling the whole time. On the outside, I looked like any proud mother. Inside, every round of applause only confirmed it. Everything I had just seen was an empty show. As the couple turned to walk out to the cheerful music, I rose and followed. My eyes stayed on the white train and the glossy tuxedo. They thought they had already won, that I was just a mother pushed aside, a checkbook with legs. But I knew this. The more perfect this ceremony looked, the harder their fall would be. I brushed my hand over my purse where the recorder was safe. The evidence was enough to expose it all. I pictured Daniel's face when he realized he'd been found out. Victoria's panic when she heard her own voice ring out before a crowd. A strange calm settled over me. People poured out of the church toward the lavishly decorated reception hall. White flowers stretched everywhere, cascading from tall vases and winding around columns. Champagne sparkled under crystal chandeliers. Music pulsed through hidden speakers, upbeat and celebratory. Guests laughed, toasted, raised their glasses in endless rounds of congratulations. I moved among them, composed, smiling as I greeted familiar faces. No one saw that behind my calm mask. I was holding a storm, ready to break. In my head, every step was set. I would wait until the room drew together, until everyone lifted their glasses to listen to me speak. Then the lies would be dragged into the light, and no one could deny them. I took my seat at the front table under warm golden lights. The head table was elevated slightly, giving a clear view of the entire room. Daniel and Victoria sat side by side at the center, holding hands, smiling at guests who came up to offer congratulations. It moved many people. Older women dabbed at their eyes. Men clapped Daniel on the back. To me, it was just makeup and masks covering rot. I breathed in slow and deep and told myself, let them enjoy their last moments of glory. After that, the stage is mine. The music softened, and the murmur of conversation faded. The chandelier lights pulled into a bright circle over the head table, where Daniel and Victoria sat. My son grinned wide, his face flushed from wine and self-satisfaction. Victoria matched him, glowing like a bride who had just grabbed her dream. The master of ceremonies, a cheerful man in a gray suit, stepped up to the microphone. His voice boomed across the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, family and friends, thank you all for being here to celebrate this beautiful union. At this time, we have a very special moment. Please welcome Margaret Harrison, the groom's mother, to share a few words on this special day." Heads turned. Expectant eyes landed on me. My heart tightened for a beat, then steadied. This was the moment I had prepared for since I walked into the ceremony. I stood slowly and lifted a glass of champagne. The golden liquid caught the light, sparkling like false promises. Chairs scraped, toasts hushed, all eyes rose to meet mine. I smiled, the smile of a proud mother, while the storm gathered inside. My voice came out clear and strong, carrying across the room. "First, thank you all for being here to celebrate with our family. For me, this moment is sacred because I get to see my son step into a new chapter of his life." Applause rippled through the crowd, warm and genuine. I paused, took a small sip of champagne, and set the glass down. My voice dropped, slow but clear, each word deliberate. For 33 years, I have lived by a promise. Since my husband Bob passed away, I swore I would protect Daniel with everything I had. I would give my son a full life and never let him face the want I once knew. A few soft sounds of sympathy rose from nearby tables. Some older guests nodded, their eyes warm with understanding. They knew what it meant to lose a spouse, to raise a child alone. I let the moment sit, let the emotion build, then continued. And today, I plan to give my son and his new wife a wedding gift, a substantial one, $18.5 million, the savings of my lifetime, the result of decades of work. The room stirred. I heard the surprised murmurs, a few gasps. Champagne glasses paused halfway to lips. Daniel squeezed Victoria's hand, his face tightening slightly as he forced a smile. Victoria's eyes lit up, her lips curling into a barely concealed grin of triumph. I drew a deep breath, lifted my head, and shifted my tone. The warmth drained from my voice, replaced by something colder, sharper. But there's something life has taught me. Not every sacrifice is valued, and not everyone deserves the gift you give. The air dipped. Curious looks turned toward me. The room, so loud a moment ago, went quiet. Daniel leaned forward, ready to speak, but I raised a hand to stop him. The gesture was small but commanding. He froze. I pulled the small recorder from my purse and set it on the table. The red light blinked on. Before I decide, I think everyone should hear a few truths. Silence fell like a heavy blanket. I pressed play. Daniel's voice filled the quiet, clear and unmistakable. After I get that money from my mother, everything will change. We won't have to hide anymore. Just be patient a little longer. The audio was so clear. A few mouths fell open. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Daniel blanched, his face draining of color. He cut in, his voice strained. "Mom, this is a misunderstanding." I looked him straight in the eye, calm but firm. A misunderstanding. Then where did these words come from? Whose mouth? Daniel. Noise rose. Guests whispered to each other, leaning in, confused and shocked. Victoria looked at her husband, eyes wide with alarm, then tried to cover with a stiff smile. I didn't give them time to regroup. I hit the next clip. "You know how my mother is. She always wants to please me. As soon as she signs this afternoon, we'll have everything. A fresh start. Freedom. No strings." When it ended, the room erupted like a kicked beehive. Daniel stammered, sprang up from his seat. It was just a joke. Don't take it the wrong way. I narrowed my eyes, cutting through him like a blade. A joke? Joking about betraying a marriage? Joking about treating your mother like a wallet? Daniel went silent. sweat beading on his forehead. Victoria tried to hold his hand, but his hand shook. I turned, fixing my gaze on her. And Victoria, you have something to explain too. I pulled the small note from my purse, the nasty line I found on my pillow that morning. Congratulations, you finally have a haircut that matches your age. Enjoy my wedding. I held it up for the nearest tables to see. You plan to erase me from this celebration by shaving my head in my sleep, a cheap, degrading stunt? Victoria shot up, face flaming red. That's not mine. You're making this up. I smiled, cool and controlled. Really? Then why did you brag in the bridal room at noon that you'd divorce in a few months and take half the money? I heard everything, and I have witnesses if needed. The room froze. Some guests glanced at each other, mouths open. Others whispered into their phones, clearly recording. Victoria's face went white, her lips trembling without sound. I let the silence stretch, then slowly raised my glass one final time. So I'm canceling the $18.5 million gift. Neither of you deserves a penny of the money I earned with blood and tears. Conversation crashed like a wave. Daniel collapsed into his chair, head down, hand over his face. Victoria stood rigid, shaking. I ended in a level voice that carried across the entire hall. The greatest wedding gift I can give today is the truth. And the truth is this: greed and betrayal never win. I set the glass down and turned to leave. Chairs scraped, voices rose. A few "oh my gods" rang out behind me, but my steps were light and steady. I was no longer the woman trembling in the mirror this morning. I was the one who stripped the masks off my son and daughter-in-law in front of everyone. In that moment, I knew I had taken back control, and the game from here on out had only just begun.